Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Rahmadani, and on this video I would like to explain about wild and isolated children and critical age issue for language learning. So, wild isolated child viral means wild or undomesticated, a human child who has lived without human contact from a very young age and has no experience of human care, of loving or social behavior of human language. And several accounts of children raised by wild animals and found living in the woods. And meanwhile, critical age issue may had human contact but were so deprived of interaction that they did not become socialized. And most do not learn language and have trouble with basic motor skills. And hard to definitely study due to have nature of child rearing or lack thereof. And next, I'm about to explain some cases, which is Victor and Janice cases. So the first one is about Victor, case about Victor, the isolated boy of everyone. So Victor was initially placed in the care of the French National Institute for the Deaf and Mute. And upon observation, psychiatrist Philippe Pinel considered that child lesser than some Parisian pets, and so much for Rousseau's concept of the barbarian aristocrat. Victor is thought to be mentally handicapped, an idiotic child recently abandoned by frustrated parent, and disappointed those who checked him suggested Victor was from Bethlehem, a madhouse, and not all doctors at the institute agreed with the diagnosis of stupidity. And Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, then 26 years old, knew that Victor had been seen years before by various residents living near the Canu forest, and Itard suspected that the boy had lived in the wild from the age of 4 or 5, and 7 years without socialization most likely means Victor has missed an opportunity that every child enjoys, exposure to language and environmental stimuli, and it seems that Victor is not an idiot at all, but just flaws. And what about the solution? So Itard would adopt the boy and travel him through a 5-point plan of action. Among these are language teaching and empathy, characteristic Itard believes are fundamental to the differences between animals and humans. And for now, there is progress. Victor didn't learn to talk like you and I did. His most common sayings are simplified versions of light or milk and oh dear or oh god. And however, he associates certain actions with meaning, acquiring a kind of mime language, and he can also sympathize and understand human emotions. And Itard recounts in his notes a scene in which Victor feels the housekeeper's grief at the loss of her husband, and seeing her tears, Victor collected the extra plates and cutlery from the table he had just set and sadly put them back in the cupboard and never to put them down again. And Victor's learning finally stopped, and he died at the age of 40 relatively anonymously. And Jutta Fried, a developmental psychologist who specialized in autism and dyslexia, believes Victor of everyone may be autistic. French surgeon and author Serge Arrols also suggested that the degree of autism might explain some of Victor's arrestic cycle behavior, and in his book The Mystery of the Wolf Children and Arrols database whether Victor is indeed a wild creature. And he mentions the impossibility that a small child could survive alone in the wild, and attributes Victor's words to domestic violence rather than the destruction of nature. And whether Victor is truly wild or whether he is among the many child hoaxes deemed wild. And next is case about Jenny raised in isolation. So Jenny was born at 1957, and Jenny is the pseudonym of an American virile child who was a victim of severe abuse, neglect, and social isolation, and her circumstances are prominently recorded in the Annals of Linguistics and Abnormal Child Psychology. And when she was approximately 20 months old, her father began keeping her in a locked room, and during this period she almost always trapped her into a child toilet or bound her in a crib with her arms and legs immobilized, forbade anyone from interacting with her, provided her with almost no stimulation of any kind, and left her severely malnourished. And the extent of her isolation prevented her from being exposed to any significant amount of speech, and as a result, she did not acquire language during her childhood. Her abuse came to the attention of Los Angeles County Child Welfare authorities in November 1970 when she was 13 years and 7 months old, after which she became a ward of the state of California. And psychologists and linguists and other scientists initially focused a great deal of attention on Jenny's case, and upon determining that Jenny had not yet learned language, and linguists saw Jenny as providing an opportunity to gain further insight into the processes controlling language acquisition skills, and to test theories and hypotheses identifying critical periods during which humans learn to understand and use language. And throughout the time scientists studied Jenny, she made substantial advances in her overall mental and psychological development. Within months, she developed exceptional nonverbal communication skills and gradually learned some basic social skills. Their case study, she still exhibited many behavior traits characteristic of an unsocialized person. She also continued to learn and use new language skills throughout the time they tested her, but ultimately remained unable to fully acquire a first language. Authorities initially arranged for Jenny's admission to the Children's Hospital Los Angeles, where a team of physicians and psychologists managed her care for several months, and her subsequent living arrangements became the subject of rigorous debate. In June 1971, she left the hospital to live with her teacher from the hospital, but a month and a half later, authorities placed her with the family of the scientist heading the research team, with whom she lived for almost 4 years. Soon after turning 18, Ginny returned to live with her mother, who decided after a few months that she could not adequately care for her, and authorities then moved her into the first of what would become a series of institution for disabled adults, and the people running it cut her off from almost everyone she knew and subjected her to extreme psychical and emotional abuse. And as a result, her psychical and mental health severely deteriorated, and her newly acquired language and behavioral skills very rapidly regressed. And in early January 1978, Jenny's mother abruptly forbade all scientific observations and testing of Jenny. Little is known about her circumstances since then. Her current whereabouts are uncertain, although she is believed to be living in care of the state of California. And psychologists and linguists continue to discuss her, and there is considerable academic and media interest in her development and the research team's methods. In particular, scientists have compared Ginny to Victor of Aveyron, and Aveyron, a French child who was also the subject of a case study in delayed psychological development and late language acquisition. So that's all for me. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.